When I brought up the idea of joining the family's annual ski trip to Aspen, my in-laws just laughed right in my face. Madison said that I should be grateful they even let me in the front door. She told me I could take a shuttle if I really wanted to go. I didn't say a single word back. They ended up landing right in the middle of a massive blizzard. Meanwhile, I touched down in the Maldives. It was first class, completely private, and I definitely wasn't alone. Sarah should be grateful we even let her in the house. She can take a shuttle. Those words felt like a bucket of ice water being thrown directly at me. My cousin Madison's voice echoed through the massive marble foyer, sounding like it was dancing off the giant crystal chandelier hanging above us. The Miller family's yearly trip to Colorado had been planned for months. For some reason, I was foolish enough to think that after 2 years of being married into this family, I might finally get an invite. I just stood there in my best cashmere dress, the one Ethan told me he liked just that morning, while all 23 members of the Miller clan started laughing. The sound filled the entrance hall like a rehearsed symphony of mean spirits. Every laugh felt like a punch to my gut. Ethan's laugh was the one that actually broke my heart. My husband, the man who promised to love and protect me, actually put his head back and roared at his cousin's cruel joke. He was laughing at me, his wife, the woman who was currently carrying his first child. Before we go any further, I want to say thank you for staying here with me while I tell these stories about finding your own inner strength. If you believe that respect and love should never be based on how much money someone has in the bank, please take a second to subscribe. It is completely free, and it helps us reach more people who might be going through a hard time just like this. Now let's get back to how everything went down. The very first time I walked into this mansion about 3 years ago, I felt like I had stepped onto another planet. Everything was just so big, so shiny, and so incredibly fancy. The marble floors looked like polished ice that went on forever. The walls were covered in gold-framed portraits of Millers who had died a long time ago. All of them looked down at me with judging eyes, like they knew I didn't belong there. The entrance hall by itself was larger than the entire house I grew up in back in the suburbs. A huge double staircase went up like a grand hug, with mahogany railings that sparkled under the lights. That chandelier, which was basically the size of a Ford F-150, hung from the ceiling and threw rainbows all over the walls. The whole place didn't just hint at old money, it screamed it at the top of its lungs. I had married into a massive fortune, but I felt like I was supposed to use the service entrance. That first family dinner is burned into my brain forever. There were 24 place settings with thin china, silverware that probably cost more than my first Honda, and cloth napkins folded into the shape of swans. They sat me right between Ethan's awkward teenage nephew and the family's priest. It felt like being sent to a deserted island. Sarah, Ethan's sister, Ashley said, her voice sounding fake and sweet. The way she said art gallery made it sound like I was selling finger paintings on a sidewalk. In reality, I had been the head curator for a very respected gallery in the city. I had a degree in art history and had built a great list of clients through hard work and a love for new artists. But under Ashley's cold stare, everything I had achieved felt small and pointless. I told her I was the lead curator for a gallery downtown and tried to keep my voice from shaking. She just said how charming, and then immediately started talking about some racehorse the family just bought in Kentucky. The conversation moved all around me, but I was never part of it. They talked about board meetings I wasn't in, charity balls I wasn't invited to, and ski trips where I clearly wasn't wanted. I got really good at smiling politely while feeling like I was completely invisible. Ethan's great-aunt Esther was the absolute worst. During my second time at the estate, she actually handed me her heavy fur coat as I walked into the room. She told me to be a dear and put it away without even looking up from her magazine. When I just stood there, confused, she looked up, looking annoyed, and pointed toward the coat closet. I hung up the coat. Ethan was right there in the room. He saw the whole thing while he was sipping his bourbon. When we made eye contact, he just gave me a little shrug, and that calm smile that I eventually learned meant that I should just let it go and not cause a scene. Later that night, when I tried to talk to him about it in the car, he just laughed it off. He told me that Aunt Esther was just old school and treated everyone like staff. He told me not to take it personally. But how was I supposed to not take it personally when it was my life now? I would offer to help in the kitchen and get pushed away like a child. Conversations would stop the second I walked into a room. They would take a big family photo and nobody would even think to ask me to be in it. The feeling of being alone was a physical weight on my chest. At family parties, I would stand on the edge of the room with a glass of sparkling water while everyone else drank expensive champagne. I learned how to fake a smile and laugh at inside jokes I didn't understand. I was pretending that I wasn't slowly being erased from existence. Eleanor was the only exception. Eleanor Miller, the head of the family, was 82 years old and had built the whole business with her late husband. She was a small woman, but she had a huge presence. She had perfect silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through people. While the rest of the family looked past me, she actually looked at me. During my third visit, she found me standing alone on the back porch while everyone else was inside networking. She came out with 2 cups of tea and sat down next to me on a stone bench. She told me that they could be a bit much sometimes. I told her I was still getting used to things. She corrected me and said I was getting used to being treated like I was invisible. Her honesty caught me off guard. I looked at her, thinking she was making fun of me, but I only saw real understanding. She told me that Ethan loved me, and she could see it in how he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. But she also said that sometimes love isn't strong enough to bridge a lifetime of arrogance and entitlement. From that day on, Eleanor became my protector. She would save a seat for me next to her at dinner. She would ask me about my day and my dreams. She would bring me tea when she saw the noise of the family was getting to be too much. When the stress started giving me bad migraines, she was the only one who noticed and would lead me to a quiet room to lie down. She was the only one who noticed I stopped drinking at the parties. She saw my hands shaking when I thought I was alone. She was the only one I could trust with my secret. I was 1 month pregnant. After 2 long years of trying and so many doctor appointments and the heartbreak of IVF treatments that Ethan had stopped caring about, I finally had a positive result. The morning I saw those 2 lines on the test, I called Eleanor before I even told my husband. I whispered the news into the phone while crying happy tears. She told me it was the most wonderful news. She was my rock during those scary first weeks. She called to check on my morning sickness and reminded me to take my vitamins. She even offered to drive me to my first ultrasound when Ethan claimed he had a meeting he couldn't miss at the office. So when Madison's mean words cut through the air that day and the family laughed at me, my first thought was to find Eleanor. She was standing by the window with her teacup, but she didn't look shocked or embarrassed. She looked absolutely furious. I had never seen Eleanor angry before. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked like cold steel. She was looking at her family like she was seeing them for the first time. The disappointment coming off her was so strong, it felt like a physical force. She put her teacup down on the ledge with a loud click. That small sound made the whole room go quiet. Madison was still wiping her eyes, looking proud of herself. Eleanor said it was fascinating and that she didn't realize they had become the kind of family that thought it was funny to mock a pregnant woman. The silence that followed was heavy. Madison's smile disappeared instantly. Ethan's laugh stopped in his throat. Every single person turned to look at me with faces full of confusion and shock. But Eleanor wasn't done yet. She walked across the marble floor with her cane, tapping a steady beat. She took my hand and asked me to come to the study because we had important things to talk about. As she led me away from the silent group of Millers, I felt something change inside me. The pain was still there, but underneath it, I felt a spark of hope. Or maybe it was just the feeling of justice starting to happen. Eleanor's study was a quiet place compared to the room we just left. The walls were lined with dark wood bookshelves, filled with real books that had actually been read. A thick rug made our footsteps silent. The sun came through the curtains and made the room feel warm. She closed the door and pointed to a leather chair. I sat down because my legs felt like they were going to give out. The weight of everything, the insult, Ethan's betrayal, and the secret I was carrying finally hit me. Eleanor sat behind her desk and told me to tell her everything from the very beginning. I didn't even know where the beginning was. Was it the first time I felt sick and thought it was just stress? Was it the morning I stared at the pregnancy test with shaking hands? Or was it back in the cold waiting rooms of the fertility clinic? I told her it had been 2 years of trying and hoping and feeling like my body was failing me. Eleanor asked about Ethan. I gave a bitter laugh and told her that Ethan thought I was obsessed and just needed to relax. It was easy for him to say since he wasn't the one tracking every cycle or giving himself hormone shots in a bathroom stall at work. The memories came back fast, the doctor explaining the issues I had, the whirlwind of treatments that made me feel sick and left bruises on my stomach, the invasive procedures that made something beautiful feel like a cold, mechanical process. I told her about the first big appointment Ethan missed. It was the main meeting to start IVF. I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours watching other couples hold hands. When I called him, he said a meeting ran late, but I found out later he was just playing racquetball with his friends. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she let me keep talking. I told her the second time was worse. It was for the egg retrieval. I was on hormones and felt bloated and scared. I just wanted someone there when I woke up. My voice cracked as I told her how the nurse kept asking where my husband was while I made up excuses for him. He actually forgot. I woke up alone in a cold room and took a lonely taxi home feeling empty. Ethan was watching a football game when I got back, and the first thing he asked was what we were having for dinner. I reminded Eleanor about the night I called her crying so hard I couldn't speak. She told me she remembered and that I told her I felt invisible. I told her I felt like I was fighting a war alone while my husband saw it as a distraction from his social life. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the gardens were perfect. I thought about the Miller children who would grow up there with every advantage, never knowing the pain of wanting something so natural and having to fight for it. Eleanor turned back and told me that was why she offered to pay for the second round of IVF. She said it wasn't because she felt sorry for me, but because she saw something in me that no one else in the family had. She said I had the ability to love something more than myself. The money had just appeared in my account, $20,000, with a note saying it was for the future of the family. Eleanor made sure Ethan never knew where it came from. She told me I didn't need to thank her because you don't thank family for investing in the future. The second round was different because Eleanor was there. She drove me to the doctor when Ethan was busy closing deals. She brought me tea and magazines. She held my hand during the transfer and told me I was the only person in the house with a real heart. She told me that she had 3 miscarriages before Ethan's father was born and that back then, women just suffered in silence. She said she thought it made them stronger, but really, it just made them lonelier. I didn't fully get what she meant back then. I thought she was just helping me. But sitting in that study after being humiliated, I saw it was something much bigger. When the test finally showed 2 lines, I stared at it for 10 minutes. I was terrified it was a dream. I called Eleanor first. She cried with me on the phone. She told me that this child would be the first great-grandchild and the heir to everything. She said that made me more powerful than any of them realized. I was too happy to care about power then. But as Ethan's excitement faded and the family kept treating me like furniture, her words started to make sense. Eleanor went to her desk and pulled out a thick address book. She found a number and picked up the phone. She called someone named Victoria and told her she needed to come to the house tonight to revise some documents. She said she wanted to change everything because she didn't want a single brick of the house to go to people who laugh at love. I wasn't really listening to the rest of the call. Something huge was happening. Eleanor was changing the foundation of the family, and I was at the center of it. When she hung up, she asked me if I was ready to stop being invisible. Before I could answer, I heard tires on the driveway. It was late, almost 11 at night. Eleanor smiled and said that would be Victoria. I heard the front door open and the sound of heels on the floor. A moment later, Victoria Reed was in the study. She looked like pure power. She wore a charcoal suit that looked expensive but professional. She looked like someone who won every argument. She had her hair in a bun and looked around the room with sharp eyes. She told Eleanor she came as soon as she got the message. Eleanor introduced me, and Victoria congratulated me on the pregnancy. I was shocked she knew. Victoria explained that Eleanor had called her weeks ago to update her medical power of attorney and mentioned wanting to make sure there were provisions for any great-grandchildren. She had been drafting the papers for a while. I realized then that Eleanor hadn't just decided this today. She had been planning this for weeks. Every question she asked me had been part of a plan. Eleanor said she had been hoping for this, but planning for the fact that the family might never change. Victoria opened her briefcase and laid out documents and a recorder. She checked Eleanor's mental state by asking her the date and other facts. Eleanor answered everything perfectly and even made some jokes. Victoria said she was satisfied and started the recording. Eleanor stated that she was of sound mind and wanted to make big changes to her will. I watched as she transformed into the woman who built an empire. She said that all the real estate, the mansion, the lake house, and the commercial buildings were to be put into a trust for my child. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The estate alone was worth millions. Eleanor continued, saying that all the stocks and business interests would go into the same trust. She said I would be the sole trustee until the child turned 25, with full power to manage everything. I tried to tell her it was too much, but she silenced me. She said the current beneficiaries, her son, her daughter-in-law, Ethan, and the granddaughters, would each get a one-time payment of $25,000. She said it was enough for a vacation, but nothing else. Victoria kept writing. Eleanor added a rule that if I divorced Ethan, I would keep full control. She said if Ethan tried to claim any of it in court, the whole estate would be sold and given to a children's hospital. She also wanted it noted that she did this because of how they treated me and how they excluded a pregnant family member from a trip. I told her she didn't have to do this just because of today, but she said she had watched them treat me like a servant for years. She saw Ethan ignore me and choose his family over his wife. She said today was just the final proof of a long pattern. Victoria asked if she was absolutely sure. Eleanor said she was more certain of this than anything in a long time. She told me I gave her real affection with no strings attached. She said I treated her like a person instead of a bank account. She said my child deserved to be raised with security by someone with a good heart. Victoria said she would file the papers Monday morning and they would be public within 2 days. Eleanor said she wanted no confusion about the new will. After Victoria left, we sat in silence. I told Eleanor I was terrified but not angry. She said fear would keep me sharp. Outside, I could hear the family laughing as they finished packing. They had no idea their lives had changed. The next morning was a big show of wealth. I watched from the window as 3 black SUVs pulled up. The family came out with expensive bags and designer glasses. Ethan looked handsome in his blazer. He was laughing with Ashley. It was the same laugh I loved before I knew it could be used against me. Eleanor stood next to me and said they didn't have a care in the world. Madison was shouting orders about where to put the champagne. She was worried about wine that cost more than a month of rent while she had just mocked me for being poor. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. A massive blizzard was coming and all flights were grounded. I showed Eleanor. She looked satisfied. She said she had hoped for this and that sometimes the universe has great timing. The SUVs drove off toward a weekend they thought would be perfect. By noon, Ethan was texting me that the flight was delayed. By 2, he was stuck on the plane. By 4, he was stranded at a tiny airfield with no cell service. Eleanor was doing a crossword puzzle. She asked for a 7-letter word for a deserved outcome starting with K. I said karma. She wrote it down. By that evening, the storm was a full blizzard. Lightning hit the sky and sleet hit the windows. I imagined the 23 of them in a small airport lounge with no five-star service and bad coffee. Eleanor asked if I was worried about them. I told her I wasn't. Victoria called and said the documents were filed in public. She said the news was already leaking to the press. We sat in the quiet while the storm raged outside. Every minute they spent complaining about the delay was a minute they spent in a world that didn't belong to them anymore. Eleanor said the family would be furious and would blame me. She said Ethan would finally have to choose between his family and his future. The baby kicked inside me for the first time. I told Eleanor it felt like a butterfly. She put her hand on mine and said the child was inheriting more than money. She said they were getting a chance to fix something broken. My phone buzzed with a headline about the Miller fortune being moved to an unborn heir. The story was out. They would land tomorrow and find out that the whole world already knew. The silence lasted all night. Eleanor fell asleep in her chair and I covered her with a blanket. At 6 a.m, Ethan called. He sounded terrible. He asked what I had done. I told him I hadn't done anything. He was screaming about the will and asking if I put Eleanor up to it. I told him to lower his voice. He said his mother was having a breakdown and reporters were calling him. I felt nothing for his panic. I asked where he was. He said he was at the house, or what used to be the house. I told him it was always Eleanor's house and she could do what she wanted. He asked how long I knew. I told him I knew the night before he left, right after Madison told me to take a shuttle. He asked if I did this because of a joke. I told him it was because he laughed at the joke. I hung up. The SUVs returned an hour later. I watched the family come back to a reality they didn't understand. But Eleanor was already gone. We had packed her car before sunrise. She went to the lake cottage. She told me she wanted to live in peace. I watched her family banging on the locked doors of the mansion. Victoria texted me that their legal challenge was already dismissed. The Miller empire fell apart fast. Without Eleanor's name, their credit disappeared. The news was everywhere. I watched it from my apartment with my hand on my stomach. Ethan came to my door weeks later, looking like a mess. He admitted he laughed because it was easier than fighting with his family. He said he failed me and our child. He said he didn't know who he was without his family. I told him that missing me didn't fix what he broke. He left, and I knew I would never see him as my husband again. A few days later, Eleanor called and asked me to move to the lake cottage with her. She said she didn't want to waste time. We moved in October. The cottage was warm and peaceful. We had a routine of tea and walks. She brought out a journal and said the child needed to know the real family history, not the fake one. She wrote about her husband and the hard times they survived. She told me to write what I wanted the child to know about me. I wrote about my mother and how real strength is kindness. The journal became our nightly ritual. Winter came and my belly grew. We heard nothing from the family. Their pride was more important than their grandchild. Spring came and Eleanor planted a garden. My divorce papers came in April and I signed them at the kitchen table. I felt sad but free. My daughter Sophie was born on a warm summer day. When I held her, I knew every hard choice was worth it. Eleanor cried when she held her. That night, Eleanor wrote in the journal that the real inheritance had begun. She wrote that it wasn't about money, but about love. She said the child would always know she was cherished for who she was. Outside, the fireflies were out over the lake. I knew that this quiet life with Eleanor and my baby was what true wealth looked like. End of story.